Okay, everyone. This is Heidi Muyeso Kunzman with the Northeast Regional Center for Rural Development based at Cornell and also with the Community and Rural Development Institute at Cornell. And I'm joined by Walt Whitmer from the Northeast Regional Center and from Penn State. Walt, you want to say hello?
Morning, everyone. Glad you're here.
Yes, we're really pleased to have everyone on. So I have 10:30, and I think with the goal of keeping us on a good schedule, we'll get started right at 10:30. And I'm sure that folks will be joining us as we go along. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what we want to do with today's presentation. For those who may not be familiar with NERCRD, the Northeast Regional Center for Rural Development, we're just going to give a brief overview of that, talk a little bit about the webinar series in some detail, then go into the primary topic for today, the research base related to local and regional food systems, and then we want to talk with you about opportunities to further this conversation. And we have a message that Walt's voice is echoing. I'm not getting it on this end. I don't know if anybody else is getting it, but we'll try to take care of that as we go along. To my email, and you are on. So, okay, we'll get going and try to work through Walt's echo. So, all right. So, just before we get started, we just want to run through the logistical details today and give you a sense of who's on the webinar with you. I think that's one of the challenges of doing these. Is it's a little bit isolating in a sense that it's hard to have a sense of who all's there, except maybe with the exception that yesterday I inadvertently sent the email to everybody without blind CCing you, so you got a huge list of who was joining or who had registered, and we'll try to avoid that in the future. But to give you a little bit of a better sense of who's on today, we've got researchers, extension staff, college students, community and economic developers, business development staff, sustainability and environmental organization representatives, watershed program staff, community-based food and ag organizations, as I think we'd expect, some foundation representatives, co-op representative, farm organizations, ag and food service agency personnel. There's folks thinking about it from a health perspective, some epidemiologists, and also some consultants. Now, this is just based on what the folks who registered for this session, so we may not have quite everybody on, but I just wanted to let you know that was up. And Catherine, you have a question, so I'm approving you. And you have the microphone now? But I'm not hearing you. Maybe drop us an email and we'll continue going through the logistical details, so drop us an email through the chat forum. Just to say a little bit more about the participants, we have, most of the folks are from the Northeast, but we have folks from Wisconsin, Georgia, Illinois, Oregon, New Mexico, Iowa State, and Oklahoma also, and there may be a few that I missed, but based on what was most obvious from your registrations, again, that's who seems to be on today. So the presentation format is we will have those topics that I just mentioned, and we'll pause in between each of those for breaks for questions and answers, comments, discussion, and then at the end, very end, we'll have hopefully an ample amount of time for further discussion, which we'll do our best to do both through the chat option and through the microphone if you are using a microphone on your computer. So we'll try to work both. So for folks who maybe have not used Adobe Connect before, I keep referring to the chat box. You can see the pod down here. You type in information in this section. I'm going to write hello everyone. And then you have the option to send it to just the presenters, to individuals, or to everyone. And I'm going to send this message to everyone. And you'll see it pop up there in just a minute. By pressing this little arrow key, I'm sending it. And then you've gotten my message. So if you come up with questions as we go along, please feel free to type those in. I'll be running through the presentation, and Walt will be monitoring the chat box and questions and kind of the logistical details end of it, and then chiming in on the side. So the other thing I just want to mention again too is that we are recording this webinar. So you are on record at this point with the goal of being able to archive the recording for folks who weren't able to participate today and for anybody who wants to go back and reference it. We'll also have the presentation, the actual PowerPoint, up on the Northeast Regional Center for Rural Development's website hopefully within the next week. So, and I just want to make it clear too that the information we're sharing with you today is based on our experience with a local foods conference last year and a survey that the Northeast Regional Center did with the Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Working Group recently, in which we identified some of the research happening in the Northeast, but certainly it's not the be-all, end-all, and so it's important to us. We really want to use this opportunity to engage with you and have you share what you're familiar with out there. So please don't be afraid to speak up and share. So with that, are there any questions at this point? We'll give you just a couple seconds to type something in. Okay. If you have them, continue feeling free to type them in, but we'll get started and move ahead. So just to give you a quick overview of the center, what we're about, our interest in local and regional foods, and then the goal for this webinar series. The mission, as you may know, of the Northeast Regional Center for Rural Development and its 3 sister centers across the country is to enhance the capacity of land-grant universities to foster rural development and regional prosperity. And the approach that we take in the Northeast Center is through research, extension, developing training and educational materials and technical support, as well as the facilitation of shared learning, peer support, and collaborative efforts. And this webinar series is really a part of both of those, trying to get the information out there in terms of what exists about the research base for local and regional foods, and then encouraging people to build on that, exchange other ideas, stuff that we're not aware of, and then hopefully move forward with some collaborative efforts either within the region or nationally. So the center works with our land-grant university partners, community and economic development agencies and organizations, and of course our sister centers across the country, and we're funded through the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. So what is our interest in activities? And I think part of the interest is just that there's so much interest in local and regional foods all over the place, but certainly in the Northeast, and we have a long history of that interest in the Northeast. I would say going back, at least that I'm familiar with, to the early 90s, and I know it was happening even before that, but we've got, I think of the Northeast as a hotbed. It crosses also several of our priority focus areas, which are balanced use of natural resources, economic development and entrepreneurship, and certainly community capacity building. Helping people develop the skills to work together to achieve their goals is certainly something that fits within the kind of sharing and coming together of community that we think is happening within local and regional food systems. And I think just in general, we see local and regional foods as an opportunity to really contribute to the overall development of rural communities. The activities that we have had underway in support of local regional foods include the What Works Conference, which was in 2005. There was a track focused, that was all about entrepreneurship, but there was a track focused on food systems there. We also, just back in May of 2009, had a conference that focused on what do we know and what do we need to know in terms of the research base and what are our extension activities happening to support local and regional foods. And we were really pleased with the outcomes of that, and this is an effort to build on that. Since then, we've developed a listserv to share the information that we have and that's coming in that we know about related to local foods. And most of the folks that signed up for that were from the conference, but we're still inviting people to do it. We also are involved in several research projects, and then there will be another What Works conference this fall, and we expect to have a local and regional foods focus, again, another track in that. So this overall webinar series, our goals are to increase awareness, again, helping people understand what's out there, what's going on, who's doing what, facilitate shared learning and peer support, how can we contribute to one another's efforts in this area to further our overall goals, spur research and extension within that collaborative You went over that already. Okay, sorry about that. Let's go to this one. So our goals for the webinar series are to increase awareness, facilitate shared learning and peer support, spur research and extension. So again, we just want folks to know what's going on related to the research for local and regional foods. We want to facilitate shared learning and peer support, spur research and extension as a result of that shared learning and peer support, and then ultimately further the development goals of the communities that we're supporting, both as a regional institution and also as a also through the land grants that we support. So I'm sorry about these difficulties. I'm not sure what's going on. Walt has just letting me know he has been bumped off as a host, so I'm just going to take 1 minute and get him back on. Okay, so we're back, and hopefully we won't have any more of these glitches. I'm not sure why that is. So our approach again is to recap the research base that was identified in the 2009 conference and also through the survey that we've done recently, and then we want to delve into topics of interest a little bit more specifically. And so the outline of these webinar series, this overview, and then the way we're going to start delving into these topics is to address the local and regional, what's the difference between local and regional food systems. And we had Kate Clancy and Kathy Ruth both talk about those at last year's conference, and they did a really nice job. So we've asked them to come back for our May 14th session. And then in June, we'll have Rich Pirog, who was also at our conference last year, talk about the work that they're doing in Iowa to develop regional food systems. And they've had some pretty good successes in terms of really deliberate partnerships with very specific strategies, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. The thing that we'll talk about again at the end of this, that's just the beginning of the webinar series. That's what we want to do between now and June. But as we identify more research and talk with you today, we're hoping that you'll contact us afterwards and say, look, could we do a webinar on our research and start getting more and more information out there about what's going on. So, okay. So how's everybody doing? Everybody's hearing me? No more glitches right now? We haven't lost anyone? Any questions? I see one up there. How do you link with the county extension folks? And one of the ways that we do that is through your land grant institutions by supporting them, but also in some occasions we are actually out working with county-based extension programs. In some states we don't have those. They're more regional, and so we're maybe a little bit more, there's an opportunity to help in those states a little bit more. Walt, do you want to add anything to that?
No, Heidi, I just posted also the link to Delaware Cooperative Extension if that would help get to a specific county.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay, so let's delve into what we wanted to talk about today, starting with the research overview. So the focus of the May 2009 conference was we started out with thinking about what are the popular claims about local and regional food systems. We know that there's a lot of things out there, and then based on that, what do we really know about those claims? How valid are they? And so what we did was ask several researchers throughout the country that are known nationally and internationally to come and talk about their work in local foods and the research that they're doing and how that research informs these claims that are out there. So on the right side, I just did a quick Google search, reasons to buy local food, and you can see these were a few of the titles that immediately came up. So as you probably know, there's lots of places that these claims are being posted and shared, and lots of assumptions about why it makes sense to buy and eat local and regional food. So that was kind of the starting point for the local foods conference last year. And you are probably familiar with these claims. This is just one example of 10 reasons to buy local food that Vern Grubinger did at the University of Vermont. And I'm assuming they're pretty familiar for folks. Okay, so we tried to frame the claims, you know, what is it that, how's a way to think about all of these different claims? And at least the way I kind of put it into context is that we're talking about benefits for consumers, producers, and communities. So for consumers, we talk about nutrition and safety, appearance and taste satisfaction. For producers, we're talking about higher prices, farm stability, because we've got a regular direct market. We also have direct feedback from consumers to help shape our businesses. There's consumer support and also social connections for producers. In terms of communities, we hear that it supports the local economy through jobs and lower taxes. It builds community, it maintains rural character, strengthens ecological health across multiple natural resources. So from there, the way that folks presented on this, these are the topics that they came in with. As I mentioned, Kate talked about local versus regional. What are the differences? Claire Henricks at Penn State talked about community impacts. Don Thilmany out at Colorado State talked about consumer perceptions, and then importantly, how to use those consumer perceptions to help producers be more effective in their marketing, and also what are some of the policy implications of consumer perceptions. Mike Ham addressed the farm to school interests, but also importantly, I think did a really nice job setting the context for what the overall interest in this research is. And then again, Rich Pirog talked about food systems infrastructure, and then Duncan Hilche, Kathy Roof, and Jennifer Wilkins kind of addressed response and research and needs, and so this is what we'll be drawing on. And again, I just want to note that in recapping the presentations given at the conference, our goal isn't to go into a lot of detail given there. I mentioned that the videos and presentations are available, but we really want to highlight the key points to give you a sense of the breadth of research underway from the perspective of those working in this field. Also, if anyone here that's on the call is familiar with this work, we invite you to chime in with additional information or clarifications as we'll be going through this quickly, and there's quite a bit to cover, so we're happy to have you again chime in. All right. So I'm going to start off with Kate. Kate's presentation gave a nice perspective. She said, you know, when did local foods enter the discourse? It's been about 35 years that we've been talking about local foods. The project started in the 70s, and she said the literature on it, the scientific literature, started in the 80s. And from her perspective, some of the key points are that food systems has multiple meanings. There's global, country, region, and local, so we're talking about a geographic context. It's also aspirational, descriptive, and not specific or common in meaning. So in other words, when we say it's tossed around a lot, the word is used quite a bit, both words, but they're not necessarily meaning the same thing for everyone. And in fact, when we talked, so that's local and regional, but when we use the word food systems, that's really an academic word from Kate's perspective. If you talk about food systems with the general public, it's not really something that carries a lot of meaning. Okay. From there, Kate said, you know, why is it important to think about local versus regional? And why is it important to more clearly define those? And some of the reasons from her perspective that we need to pursue clarifying this definition is that certain size farms may be optimal for certain sized food systems in terms of local versus regional. Certainly at a regional level, probably small farms are not going to be able to meet the needs of a region. We need to scale up and have more medium-sized farms. On the other hand, small farms are maybe perfectly fit to reach out to local communities. Similarly, economies of scale come into play with other related businesses. Land use is important on both levels, but land use is usually handled in terms of policy at the local level. So it's something that we need to think about there. Municipal boundaries are important in some ways, particularly relative to decision making, and infrastructure is important, and all of these issues tie into this local versus regional designation. The other thing is that another kind of problem from Kate's perspective is that we conflate or use simultaneously or confused by how local and regional fits with other terms. So there's tends to be an assumption that everything local or everything regional is going to be environmentally sustainable, when in fact that's not necessarily so. We think that local and regional often means direct marketing, and certainly in some of our even local food systems there are middle people, distributors, processors, and others in terms of wholesalers between the farmer and the consumer. So kind of laying out those first kind of primary points, Kate then said, look, there's some research needs that we have here based on this, and from her perspective it really is about clarifying the definition and the difference between local and regional, and getting some folks to really think hard about what those distinctions are. And it may be that it's not the same in every place, even the use of those words in places that the USDA, for example, defines them differently than say the state of Vermont has a definition for local foods. And so we need to have some sort of consistency across those definitions and clarity about what they actually entail. Again, this idea that there are some farm sizes that are optimum for certain kinds of foods and food systems. What are those, and how do we support those? What is the land base needed for certain kinds of systems, local and versus regional? What's the role of local decision making in securing that land base? And then again, we need to understand the ecosystem relationships, water, climate, wildlife, infrastructure requirements at both levels. And from her perspective, we really need to be doing this from a systems perspective. We need to be thinking multidisciplinary and thinking about whole systems. And her other comment is we need to be doing more to showcase best practices regarding solutions. And we'll see that that's a continuing theme that others will suggest throughout these presentations at that conference, particularly in terms of needs for assessments and consistent assessments across multiple different strategies, so that when we're measuring and assessing these best practices, we're being consistent in the way we do them. They're not individual to single projects or programs. Wal, anything you want to add about Kate's?
No, I think that covers it well, Heidi. I think we're still getting an echo on my part. Someone suggested that when I speak, you turn off your mic. That might help, but otherwise, does that help, folks? Let us know if it does, and that might take away some of the aggravation. Good, that is the case, Heidi, so that will take care of it. But no, I think you covered Kate's stuff really well. Thanks.
Okay, so moving into community impacts, which was Claire's focus, she made it a point to say, following Kate, that the focus of the research that she's going to talk about really is at the local level. She's talking about direct market exchanges, and most of the research in this area has been done on community-supported agriculture enterprises and also farmers markets. This comes from a civic agriculture framework. Some of you may know of Tom Lyson's work with community as a driver and an outcome for this type of agriculture. That we're talking about, these direct markets and this focus of building community through the connection and nexus of local foods. So from her perspective, the whole kind of premise behind civic agriculture and this focus on community impacts is that food is a biological necessity, but at the same time it provides an opportunity for interaction between people. It's a place that we can and almost have to come together to secure this basic biological need. Through this interaction, there's this presumption that community will be built just by people coming together, and then through the building of community, connections that in some places have been lost will be restored, and as well as cultural meaning that was associated with food and those connections. And I thought it was really interesting in Claire's conversation or presentation with us last year, she kind of put this in a broader context, referencing some sociological research that shows that there is really that social connections are declining, and that's research that shows that core non-family confidence significantly decreased between 1985 and 2004, and it was just a case that we're really not reaching out and connecting with other people anymore. And so from her perspective, this interest in the community impacts of coming around related to joining through local food connections is really important. It's timely. People are interested in ways to kind of restore those connections. So from Claire's perspective, when you look at the research, there's basically three groups of community impacts related to these direct markets. There's basic social connections, there's learning and behavioral adaptations, and social justice and equity issues. And from her perspective, they're also kind of happen in an ascending order. In other words, folks start off with these basic social connections from coming together. They meet, greet, get to know each other. As a result of establishing those social connections and shared meaning, then there's an opportunity for learning and behavioral adaptation. So folks start to see and learn new things through these connections, and then start to change their behavior as a result of that. And then there's also, once you've started to learn and behave differently, we start to address some social justice and equity issues by changing our behavior and then changing society in some ways. And so I'm not going to go into the detail there, but I do reference some of the points that she made in terms of the research results in each of those areas. So after sharing some of those research results, she kind of raised, I thought, some interesting points about the limitations and opportunities for further research. So at least in terms of this kind of social and community impact, she noted that the evidence for each category is mixed, as we might expect. So in some cases we're seeing that these connections are being made, but in other cases not so well. There's also, in some cases, a strong economic motivation for these social connections. So you ask, is it really truly based in an interest in being socially connected, or are there other things related to that? So again, the evidence for each category is mixed. She noted that it's really largely based on single research methods. So folks are either using surveys or focus groups or interviews, and from her perspective it would be really more of a robust way to look at it by using multiple different methods, that we could get more of the bigger picture of what's really going on. She also noted that a lot of the research tends to be initiative specific, and in fact it's often related to the community-based organizations that are supporting some of these initiatives and some of these programs, and it's good information specific to that individual enterprise or that individual effort, but it's really hard to, without consistent indicators, to allow for comparisons or data aggregation across a lot of these different programs. So from her perspective, we really need to think about how to develop some consistent indicators and measurements, metrics, and be able to use the same types of methods across multiple programs, across within communities, across communities, and in fact probably across the country. Without it, we really can't have a start for kind of a cumulative knowledge base in that area. So moving on to Dawn Thilmany, who is out at Colorado State, and again focusing on consumer perceptions. From her perspective, the reason that they focused on consumer perceptions is that the movement around local and regional foods has been very consumer driven, and they've also found evidence for conscientious and civic-minded consumers. So the way they think about this out at Colorado State with her multidisciplinary team of folks that she's been working with is it really sets a research agenda for understanding these perceptions, but also clarifying and educating. So are these perceptions based in reality? If not, what do we need to do to help consumers understand things better? But at the same time, if we understand these perceptions, there's certain policy implications. And to me, one of the most interesting points that she made was that if consumers are willing to make investments because they perceive local and regional foods to be good or bad in certain ways, what other investments might they be willing or not willing to make in terms of their tax dollars? So if folks are willing to support local and regional foods and maybe see a connection between that and the preservation of land, are they willing to agree to pay taxes in some ways if we put taxes to develop more land preservation initiatives or those kind of things? And so their point is that understanding these consumer perceptions helps us think about different policy opportunities. Okay, so they used a national survey data to look at consumer motivators for paying a premium on certain types of food, for example, fresh produce versus direct market and organic production practices. So I'm going to run through this quickly, and I would encourage you to go and look at Dawn's stuff online that I just mentioned. And again, we'll send out the web link to that. But I'm just going to go over this because she shared a lot of information in a really short time, but I just want to give you a general sense of what it was that she was looking at. They also looked at how people are defining local, and just will note that a lot of different ways, but most are within a county or less than 100 miles between the producer and the consumer. They also looked at the extent to which consumers feel their purchasing behavior helps solve societal problems. So they looked at carbon footprint, climate change, the local economy. And part of that research was just even getting an understanding of if people understand what we mean by carbon footprint, climate change, and local economy. One of the things that was interesting with that is the local economy, as you might expect, was much more of a meaningful way of understanding and connecting to the ways that they feel like they could make an impact than some of these things that are a little bit more esoteric and at a distance than the outcomes of carbon footprints and climate change. So based on the research that they did out there, they said that, look, there's a diverse set of consumer perspectives, and we need to help farmers, therefore, develop diverse marketing materials. So kind of similar to what Claire found, that there's mixed, but we can identify different consumer groups based on different socio-demographic characteristics, and we need to help farmers know how to reach out to those with different marketing materials and strategies. She mentioned that some people are okay with certification for quality assurances. So when we're talking about food safety issues and those kind of things as motivators, we find that some are fine with having a federal, local, or state agency certify quality, but others want that direct connection to say that my food is safe and that I'm actually getting these public versus private benefits. She also talked about the need to explore how to meet direct quality assurances on a more regional scale. So again, going back to this local and regional differentiation, from her perspective, as we start to scale up and think more regionally with our food systems, there's this possibility or probability of losing that direct connection. And one of the things she asked are some of the community-based organizations out there a way to kind of maintain if we move up to that more regional level, a way to maintain some sort of more direct connection between producers and consumers as we scale up. And she's arguing that that's really going to be important if one of the benefits and one of the motivators for buying food locally or regionally is that they want this direct quality assurance versus having a certification. Okay, so areas for further research from Dawn's perspective, the mixed public good and private aspects of food products for different consumers. So what she means by the public goods, again, mitigating food miles, carbon footprint reduction, support for local economy are kind of public good type things, and then private goods are safety and quality aspects of food products for different consumers. In terms of the role for market venues in the food supply chain relative to public and private good perceptions, again, that's what we just talked about, with a need to think about how different market venues are going to affect those perceptions and how other organizations or agencies can come in and make that connection. And then how do we use the marketing and certification programs to leverage consumer perceptions? So can we do that through our marketing campaigns and also at the state level? If we know that people are thinking this way and they have these motivations, how can we tap into that to increase the benefit that we're getting out of our marketing and certification campaigns? Okay. All right, so let me just take a sip of water. Actually, I should give Walt a chance, so I'll turn off my mic. Walt,
I didn't catch the last part of that, Heidi, but no, I think you've covered this well. Obviously, folks, there's a lot more there than we can cover today, but I think this gives you a good overview and snapshot of the kinds of things these folks have been working on and their perspectives. And when we had asked these folks at the conference last year, we had really purposely selected them and invited them as invited presenters because they had really been involved in some of the more cutting edge or comprehensive research in this area. As Heidi said, it isn't everything that's out there, but I think it does capture well sort of the breadth of all this, and Heidi's done a great job, I think, of providing you that overview.
thanks, Walt. I'm not sure it's a great job, but hopefully it does give folks a sense of what's going on out there. And Melissa, it looks like you're asking what the link to the research is, and we'll send you a link to the presentation so that you can see that stuff. I assume that's what you meant by that question. If not, let us know and we'll try to figure out what it is that you're after. So Mike Ham, when he spoke, it was in the, I guess, middle of the conference and the first day of presentations. And what he did before he really got into the work that they're doing in Michigan around farm to school was set the context, the larger context for all of this local and regional food systems work. And for me, it put some things, I think, really into perspective. He kind of gave both a global picture and the picture of what's going on in Michigan. And he first addressed challenges, noting that, nutrition is sadly lacking overall. We're not meeting what we're supposed to be doing in terms of nutritional requirements for fresh fruits and vegetables as a society. At the same time, our population is increasing, so not only are we not meeting it for the population that we have, but the population is increasing, and at the same time, our land and water base on which we can produce food is threatened, both domestically and internationally, in part from the increasing population. So we've got this set of challenges out there. We've got health challenges and we've got ecological challenges. At the same time, his argument is that if you look at communities pretty much everywhere, they have certain values that he really classifies, I think, or thinks about in terms of a sustainable development context. We want personal health and well-being, we want vibrant economies, and we want healthy ecosystems, and ones that we are even enhancing and improving because we know that they're in jeopardy now. So he says, look, we've got these challenges, we've also got these values, but really this presents an important opportunity. And the way he frames all of the work that they do out in Michigan is how to bring these opportunities and challenges together. So how do we use our ag and food systems to meet our nutritional challenges, to address land and water issues, to increase and develop vibrant economies or reestablish vibrant economies. So he says, look, by putting money and energy into local and regional food systems, we can increase the access to a healthy food supply, we can build individual businesses and economy, we can stabilize the land base, protect water systems, and ultimately strengthen our ag and rural communities. And again, I've kind of presented this work in the order in which folks presented it at the conference, but I really thought Mike did a nice job of putting all of this into a bigger context, and it's interesting to kind of follow through and see where he takes that in terms of the work that they're doing. So given that this is the context in which we're all operating in, really their approach then to local and regional food systems is to explore how to make those connections, how to meet health goals and simultaneously create economic development. And to do that, they started off by looking at what increasing consumption of Michigan-grown fresh fruits and vegetables would do. And so they did this study and said, look, if we get everybody to eat a little bit more, fresh fruits and vegetables, but we supplied that need through Michigan-grown fresh fruits and vegetables, and they looked at it just in terms of what's seasonal in Michigan. So they weren't even thinking about processing or any of those kind of things for winter storage. What would that result in? And they came up with really significant increased need for land, farm, and then farmers to do the production. And then if you go from there, well, it's also an increased income for the farmers and also the related enterprises. So there's this opportunity to, again, make this connection between human health and economic development. So if they are saying that these are what our potential outcomes are for doing this, how do we start meeting those needs for that economic development and the health goals? So from their perspective, we have to be able to have training programs for farmers. We have to be able to get farmers who are able to meet this need. They also have to have the land to be able to do it, business development skills, they have to have capital, but we also can't expect them just to be able to do it for part of the year, particularly in the Northeast and out in the northern areas of the country. Are going to have to think about some season extension where we can keep folks having a good income over the course of the year. At the same time, then they also started thinking about, well, how do we connect this back and bring this full circle to this health, to human health goals, and we have to make sure it's not just people who are already getting some of those fresh fruits and vegetables easily, but folks who are more food insecure. And so they started making all of these links. And because I think this stuff is pretty important, I just want to mention a couple of the, I thought, innovative things that they mentioned there. They are actually looking at developing ag IDAs where some economic development money comes in. Farmers can have a small amount of that. It's matched with other funds. From the IDA, they have their own funds, and they're using that to leverage opportunities to buy equipment and those kind of things. So they're looking at developing these capital programs. They're looking at training programs for farmers, and from their perspective, there's 3 different sources of farmers. There's folks who have grown up on farms who for a long time were kind of trained to leave the farm. Let me go back. I just saw the question about what is an IDA. It's a I'm spacing on the term, but it's basically in New York State, they are sources of local funding for economic development. And so, thank you, Mary. It's an industrial development agency in New York State, but they have the same kind of thing where money is used to support businesses. And most, at least in our industrial development agencies in New York State, ag enterprises aren't typically funded through IDAs, so they're changing these a little bit where you can connect them to ag enterprises out that way. So I started with the training programs for farmers. So folks who have grown up on farms. There's also opportunities for folks who are immigrating to this country that have been farmers in their own country, and then there's the new generation, both younger and retirees, who are going back to the farm. And their point is that we need to understand the different needs of each of these individual potential farmers and meet those in different ways. And so they're looking into that. They're looking into these land link programs. And I mentioned the season extension with the link to food insecure families because they've had a hoop house project out there where they've actually put hoop houses out given them to farmers, and then they're actually doing some evaluation and studies in terms of what the season extension opportunities are and what that means in terms of increased income. But then they're talking about how to maybe put some of those hoop houses with farms that are near communities where there's a high use of like farmers markets and WIC programs and that kind of thing, so that they're making sure that folks who are food insecure have opportunities to get that additional produce. So they're again making this bigger connection. So those are some of the ways that they're approaching it. So then he went from there specifically to talk about what their farm to school initiatives are within this context of, again, meeting both human health needs, ecological needs, and economic development opportunities all in the same thing. So they first started out with a survey of school food service directors, and this was, I think, I can't remember exactly when, but I want to say 2004 or earlier on, maybe even before that. And they found that the school food service directors in Michigan have a strong interest in Michigan-grown products. They also did a qualitative study of farmers, school food service, and distributors to understand why they participate in farm to school. And they found that there are some similarities in terms of those reasons, with children's diet and preferences being one of them. Farmers want influencing children's diets, and school food service directors pleased that students like these local and regional foods. There's also an economic benefit. In some cases, it is cheaper for school food service directors to get their food locally, and the farmers, of course, like the economic benefit. And both of them talked about the support for the community, support for one another in making those investments. So based on this information, they also noted that there are certainly barriers to overcome in developing farm-to-school programs, and so they started to look at how do we overcome these barriers, knowing that people want to come together and make these farm-to-school initiatives work. So some of the barriers that they started to address was geographic preference policy. So it used to be that you couldn't have a geographic preference, and so now I think both nationally and locally they've made it so that you can have some geographic preference in your bidding processes for school food service directors. That he noted that the ag department and the education department, so farmers and farms are under the ag department, and then schools are under the education department, and they created legislation that said you guys have to work together to help address these needs. And we've also done that in New York State. We've started having them work together more collaboratively. Farmers and school food service people, they've noted, speak different languages, so they've started to put together some guides to help them talk with each other, and they've done one for school food service, and now they're working on another one, at least as of last year, that'll help farmers understand the needs of school food service personnel when they're working with them. And then I think this again goes back to some of the really innovative stuff that they're doing in making this come full circle. They're trying to get economic development funds at the state level, maybe it's coming also from the national level, funneled through school food service for the purchase of Michigan food. So they're saying it is an economic development initiative to use this money, this funding, for economic development for purchases of foods produced in Michigan that'll help feed kids in Michigan. So again, thinking about this bigger picture, they're simultaneously improving health and economic vitality. So I think he did a really nice job, again, of fitting this into the big picture, and just wanted to spend a little bit of time of helping us understand that. Walt, I'm going to turn it over to you again for a minute in case there's anything you want to add.
Not right now, Heidi. I think this is great.
The other person that spoke that kind of gave us a bigger picture was Rich Pirog, and it was nice because in the conference we kind of worked from more local kind of direct connections to this bigger picture of the infrastructure and how to put it all together between producers, consumers, and communities. So Rich started out just noticing that his focus has been in the Midwest, but it's very similar to the Northeast in that they've had several notable successes, lots of CSAs developing, farmers markets, cooperatives between producers and consumers, ag commodity groups joining together and having more success, but they've still got extensive challenges that really, when you look at these successes, they're great, but we've got a long way to go, and that's kind of the basis from which they're starting. So they started experimenting with a systems approach that they call the Value Chain Partners Initiative, and you might say, well, isn't this more applied? And it is applied, but the important part is that they've incorporated research into this, and they're really trying to figure out, it's one, based on research, the way that they're developing this, and then two, they're assessing it and evaluating it as they go along to understand why it's working and how it might be furthered and expanded on to create more success. So the partners in this chain are farmers, processors, distributors, and eaters. So it's really across the food systems, but they also have state agencies and service providers and others coming into this. So they have technical assistance, capital, and policy all wrapped up into one, which I think for some folks, and I will say this is across the region and across the state, that's probably new in that it tends to be, I think, fairly tough on a large scale to bring all of those partners together. So this is really what they're trying to do, and if you talk to Rich, he'll tell you he really sees it as something new and different from what's been done before, at least on this scale. So let's see. So they are trying, again, to track the outcomes of what they've been doing. They, some of the things that they have found is that there's community and state support for business incentives as a result of these partnerships, where before they didn't have communities investing in their local and regional food systems, and they're finding more investments are being made. They're finding new and different types of research and development in this process, so people are working together more collaboratively. They're also finding that technical and financial assistance is coupled. So in the past, where you just had technical assistance and you had money being thrown at projects, now they're bringing them together so that money is being invested in places where people are getting the assistance they need to move forward with their projects, and they're finding new collaborations between all of the different groups, and they really talk about them as sincere collaborations. Again, so I mentioned that they're tracking their outcomes, but they're also doing this based in research that's out there. They're looking at the literature on what defines a successful network, and they use that as a starting place to start putting these together. They're looking at trust level theory, which says what kinds of relationships are necessary to have high levels of trust, and they're trying to build those relationships. They're looking at successful business development models. So there's work out there that's been done that say some of the most successful business companies have these characteristics, and they're trying to adapt those in these value chains. Similarly, they also use a concept on tacit knowledge theory, which this is knowledge that has to be thought about to be shared, and so it's recreated in the moment. So it's very much about engaging these groups of people in this ongoing interactive and integrative learning process. So they're constantly working together, constantly developing new information, sharing it, working together, and then building on that to take their value chains to the next step. From his perspective, the core competencies that this has created is that they have research partners, are these info hubs. These groups that are working together are great research partners to take and understand where this is going. They're finding that there's more catalysts for cooperation through these groups. They're also serving as magnets. They're bringing in big funding, and again, if you looked at his presentation on the website, he has several different graphs and charts that show the types of money that they're bringing in, but they are really doing a fantastic job at leveraging local, state level, and federal funds to invest in these projects. And then I think what's really important is they're talking about, they're not just waiting to think about working on just what they're doing, but they're really trying to look for what's the next big thing that we need to be proactive to do to support and enhance our ag and food systems. And so they're looking to move forward to the next innovative thing. So it's about innovation. From his perspective, again, this is very different. Their partners are collaborating versus competing, and I think we can all probably understand where he's coming from there, that we have small sources of funding overall for this kind of work, even though, you know, there's some bigger investments, but a lot of times we're competing against one another to get those funds, and they're finding that no, in fact, because they're bringing people together in this way out there, that people are working very closely, and their focus is on success for the overall network and not just the individual organizations, which I think is a very different frame of reference. He said that the behavior is different overall. They're growing funding, sharing knowledge, and dispensing leadership versus competing for funding, protecting knowledge, holding it close. In his words, we're hoarding leadership. They're really working together, creating new leaders, and sharing responsibility for moving forward. And he said the structure is very decentralized versus one that was more centralized in the past. And again, they're seeing what they perceive as really good things coming out of this. I'll pause for just a second. Walt, is there anything you want to add to what's going on with the value chains?
No, I think you covered it well. Thanks, Heidi.
Wow, Walt's making me feel really good today. I hope you guys are feeling like you're getting a good sense of it too. I know he's heard it before. So following those presentations, again, Duncan Hilche, who is a consultant with New Leaf and formerly with Cornell University's Community Food and Agriculture Program, Kathy Roof with the Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Working Group, and Jennifer Wilkins with the Cornell's Farm to School program in the Division of Nutritional Sciences at Cornell, were asked just to reflect on what they heard during the presentations and share their perspectives on areas for further research. So again, just to give you a sense of, you know, here's we've talked about, at least from the perspective of these researchers, what some current areas for local and regional food systems research is, and then here's some ideas for ways that we need to move forward with that research. So again, this theme of local and versus regional, and what's the role of optimal scales and optimal geographies, how do we define that? What part of the food and farming system are we talking about at both levels? I thought that was something that was very interesting that Kathy Roof mentioned is, you know, by talking just about food, we're leaving a lot of non-food farms out of the conversation. And when we're talking about local and regional, they really need to be, and part of an overall system, they need to be put into this conversation and part of the mix that we're trying to get a better understanding of and ultimately trying to enhance. How we talk about food systems needs to be considered, again, because it's not meaningful to the general populace. How do we get people to understand what it is that we're talking about in a meaningful way? What do we know about farmers in the context of local versus regional? What are their needs at both levels? Why would or would it not make sense for them to participate in local and regional food systems? How do we re-engage disenfranchised consumers and ensure for food security? What's the other side? We've talked about the farmers. How do we really reach out to those consumers? What skills do consumers need to be able to take advantage of local and regional food systems? We also need, and I think this was really coming out of Duncan's work, tools to help communities monitor and track their agriculture and food systems development. And I think that's particularly important when we think about this stuff, this bigger picture stuff that Mike and Rich were talking about. You know, we can say we have these goals, we can see bits and pieces of progress, but if we're not thinking about this and really deliberately and strategically saying, you know, here's where we want to get to. Are we getting there? And if not, what do we have to do to get to this bigger picture? So those tools and assessments are really, really important. And then from Kathy's perspective, again, this need to really link the research we're doing to both understand but also inform policy is really important. For those of you who know Kathy, she's spent her professional career really focusing on policy issues, and so from her perspective, it's really important that we do more to link our research to informed policy. Okay, and then I think while we're thinking about these areas for further research, just based on some of the things that we heard from those speakers earlier on, there's certain kind of general considerations that we need to keep in mind as we're developing that new research. We need to clearly articulate and define the frame. You've heard that over and over again. The need for consistent and replicable indicators again. It's okay to be working on these individual projects, but how do we know as we're assessing and monitoring these individual programs what it means in terms of the really big picture and where we're at, and how do we measure and compare one against the other? The research should be developed with researcher and practitioner partnerships. That was a comment that Jennifer Wilkins made at our workshop last year. It was really targeted towards research and extension folks, although we had a lot of community-based organizations. And I think Jennifer's request was good and important, and saying, you know, our research needs to be informed and developed in partnership with the folks that are out there doing this work. We need to be at the same table. And then again, just going back to what Kate Clancy started off with talking about in terms of multidisciplinary work being important. We need to have multiple people at the table to think about all of this from a systems perspective. Okay, so that was a lot of information that I just spilled out there, and just trying to recap the stuff that folks have been doing. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Comments? Ben, let's see if we can. Walt, you got that? And I will shut up.
Go ahead, Ben.
Ben, I'm not hearing you. Do you have a microphone? If you don't have a microphone, type in your questions or comment. Okay, while we're waiting for Ben to type in or get his mic maybe on, I just saw that, Lisa, you asked if we would be talking about funding opportunities, and we're not going to be talking about those today, but that's certainly something in the future that if folks wanted to think about research funding opportunities, we could consider putting together a webinar next fall along those lines. So I've just jotted that down as a note. I just also want to say, you know, I'm pausing here because we still have a little bit more to talk about based on the survey that NESOG and the center just did. So I want to give you a sense of some of the different types of more Northeast specific research going on that we've just been learning about. I think you'll find that pretty interesting. So Ben is back. I'm wondering if anyone in the audience, or if you know about work or partnerships related to the tourism recreation components of local food. So certainly if other people know, please type in what you know about that. I will, Ben, say that I have worked with folks at Cornell that have done some research on ag and tourism and published some on that, but that has been quite a while since that work's done. I'd be happy to share that with you if you want it, and you should have my email contact information, so just drop me a note and I could send you that. Other people who want to do that? Want to add to what Ben was asking? Okay. David, you asked, you said you'd like to delve more into Rich Pirog's Valley Chains Partners Initiative. So I'm not sure if you are signed up for, just because I don't have that list in front of me, for the third webinar that we're doing, but Rich will be coming to talk about that in our June webinar. You can also go to the website that we'll send out and see his presentation that he gave, but we're going to ask him to be a little bit more specific, I think, in this June webinar. So stay tuned for that if you want more information. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, so Jane, thanks for sharing the work out of Wisconsin. Lisa, can you explain more what you mean by creating protocols for communities? I'm not sure that's a term that everybody will understand. I'll give you just a minute to do that, and then if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to post them now before we leave. So consistent assessment practices. Actually, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the work that is going on, and we'll share a couple of those projects that are doing that in the next few projects that we're going to talk about. I can also say my colleague Duncan Hilty, who I worked with at the Community Food and Agriculture Program, has been developing an Ag and Food Systems Indexed that they went out and worked with communities in New York State to identify, and I think it was through Kellogg funding, to identify what are really some of the important characteristics from their perspective about Ag and food systems. And based on that, they created an index and that communities could use to kind of track their progress. So what are some of the indicators that say this is a vibrant or well-functioning ag and food system, and how are we doing on that? So again, if you want more information about that, I'm happy to share that. I don't know about other folks. I can get you that information, Lisa, if you email me. Okay, Walt, did I miss any questions there?
No, I don't think so. And I'm responding to a couple of them within the chat box. What was I going to mention? I just drew a blank. I'm glad that someone highlighted the National Farm Foundation as well. Nope, I think that covers it. Thanks, Heidi.
Okay, thank you, Walt. I think what we'll do then, for now, is move on to talk about a little bit more specifically about some of the efforts in the Northeast, and then we'd like to engage you again in a conversation before we go about how we can further our work together and what some opportunities for further collaboration might be. So. Okay, so going again back to this frame that we've the way we've thought about the claims about local and regional food, so health and nutrition, overall community food systems, producer impacts, environmental impacts, and related to that land use, land preservation and use are some of the categories that we wanted to share some of the research that we've learned about very recently. And I want to be clear when I mention this that the stuff we're about to share has really just been entered into a survey, again, that the Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Working Group and the Northeast Regional Center for Rural Development collaborated on, I think over the fall and maybe even after the NESOG conference if people attended that. So maybe it was even more recent. I'm not exactly sure, but it's been within the last 6 months that this survey has been done. And so it was just about asking folks in the Northeast to share the research activities that they're engaged with. And so faculty, staff, and students at land-grant and other academic institutions, extension staff, and community-based organizations shared, representatives of these groups shared some of the work that they're doing. And again, this is multiple pages of information that were shared through this, so we will not mention all of the projects here. We just don't have the time, but I just want to say that there's a lot being done. The ones that we've chosen to share today we did so because they're maybe a little bit either different, they seem to be new, or they represent collections or areas of research that seem pretty popular and that lots of people are doing. So we in no way intend to leave anybody out as we're mentioning this stuff, but again, just want to give you this flavor. If, we go through these, if you are familiar with one of them and want to share something more about it, again, please do so. And if there's anything you want to add to it as we go through each one, please let us know as well. It's important to hear more. So. And we're certainly not going to have captured it all. So in terms of the health and nutrition claims, I just wanted to point out, and this isn't so recent, but I think it's important because I think we constantly hear that local and regional foods are more nutritious or more tasty. And Jennifer Wilkins wrote an extension publication, I think maybe even in 2006, that address this issue, and basically drawing on the research of others, she said it's really, we can't say whether or not it's more nutritious. It really depends on climate, environmental factors, including light, temperature, rainfall, season, altitude, soil fertility, and those kind of things. When a crop matures, the varieties of the crop, handling, post-harvest handling, transportation, storage, and distribution practices. So there is some research out there that kind of answers this question, and I think it's important for people to be able to access this. Also, another kind of health-related initiative that Jennifer is working on with Christian Peters, who was formerly at Cornell and now at Tufts University, is called Eat Your Vegetables, and it's looking at whether seasonal CSA membership increases produce consumption across a year. And so I think that's really kind of interesting, because I think a lot of times CSAs, one of the goals there, and I have done some research on CSAs, is to get people to eat more healthy, and they're really trying to look at this. Can we say that over the course of a year, folks are eating more fresh fruits and vegetables or produce overall as a result of their participation in CSAs? There's food systems analysis modeling, kind of this bigger community or regional level of analysis to try to do this tracking, what's there and how can we improve it. So one that we've just recently learned about is the New York City Regional Food Shed Analysis. It's being conducted at the Urban Design Lab at Columbia University, and this is an in-depth analysis of the New York City metropolitan region's food production and distribution capacity, with a focus on developing policy recommendations for increasing the capacity. And the focus that they're taking on this will be on looking at land use, soil type, transportation infrastructure, climatic conditions, and consumption data to help develop that. There's a similar one going on in Maryland. They're designing a mapping resource tool with this Maryland Food Systems Mapping Project that's based at Johns Hopkins to analyze Maryland's food systems, looking at food access, the state of production and production capacity, processing and distribution linkages, and they'll be utilizing geographic information systems to do it. So they're really targeting the tool that they're trying to put together for public health, nutrition, and agricultural communities who are developing research and program activities related to local food systems. So, Melissa, regarding your question about have they come to a conclusion about whether CSAs increase veggie consumption, I think this is still in progress, and I think they're really just getting started. And so a lot of these next projects that we're going to be sharing are really kind of hot off the press. It's stuff that's going on right now. So I don't think that they have, but it's certainly something that you could get in touch with them and find out where they're at with this kind of work and follow it as they get the results. Okay, so more in terms of food systems analysis and modeling, and it seems like there's a lot of work going on in this area of really trying to get at an assessment of what's going on across communities and across regions and even at the state level to try to think about what our capacity is for local and regional food systems and how to enhance that capacity. So at the University of New Hampshire, there is this food system scenario tool, which I think is a little bit different in that they're trying to collect this information to be able to point to trend or use trend analysis, and they're making it as a web-based tool that folks can draw on the information that's there and consider or plug in different information and consider what alternative outcomes would be. So they're using a combination of sociodemographic and food systems data there. So that's really a tool that they're not just trying to assess what's happening, but they're trying to provide or equip folks with the opportunity to explore alternative scenarios if they change different variables within the food system. So I think that's kind of new and interesting. Looking at it from a little bit of a different perspective in terms of a commodity-specific analysis at Tufts University and in collaboration with the American Farmland Trust, they've got this New England Milkshed study going on, and it's really a regional supply chain analysis of milk and dairy products. So, and we're seeing, I think, more and more of this broader supply chain and interest in that and trying to understand what our supply chains are and how to enhance those or support them. Okay. So in terms of producer and supplier concerns, some of the research that we have been learning about, there's one project here that was mentioned out of Pittsburgh University that they're looking at the use and impact of information technology in farm markets. So how are folks using information technology to support their enterprises? There's also, and I'm not really sure, does anybody know Eric DeLuca? As far as I could tell, he's with this Neighbor Co-ops organization, which is a alliance of 18 food co-ops from Vermont, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts that are working together to support a sustainable regional food economy. And he is part of this Northeast Regional Infrastructure Working Group, which a couple of folks met. And the purpose of this working group is to address questions related to appropriately scaled, decentralized processing infrastructure in the Northeast. So they're really focused on inventorying the processing infrastructure, and as far as I can tell, that's both fruit and vegetable processing as well as meat processing facilities. So they're just trying to get a sense of what's out there, and then how can we be, again, supporting the development of that in a way that meets the needs of this growing interest in local and regional food systems. If there's anybody else on that knows more about that, please feel free to pitch in. Other producer and supplier concerns, there's work that Claire Henricks shared with some of her students that are master's students. There's a hybrid foods network, and so this is out of Penn State. And the purpose of that work is it's qualitative research on the goals, operation, and outcomes of when, I think this is interesting, conventional food distributors become conduits for local food. So it's looking at how these distributors are getting into and what some of the incentives are and their goals are for becoming more of a, for dealing with locally and regionally sourced foods, which I think is really important. And I say that just having done farm to school work and knowing about some of the challenges for distributors to, particularly the bigger they are, to be sourcing local foods. So another of Claire's students is looking at experiences and concerns regarding hired labor for small and medium vegetable and fruit growers. So they are focusing, it's a qualitative study that's focusing on 15 central Pennsylvania growers with concern about the incorporation of, focusing really on the incorporation of the local labor supply into their enterprises. So they're trying to get a better sense of how all that works. And Claire just mentioned another one, and again, I am not trying to, I just want to emphasize that we're not trying to just highlight certain individuals, but just to show kind of the diverse projects that are going on. She's working on, it looks like a national project that they're led by Beth Barham at the University of Arkansas and presumably others, because it's a USDA cooperative grants project, on building a producer organization around American origin products. So this really involves identifying, and I quote, typical or American origin products for states in the Northeast. Claire's looking at the Northeast, but they're looking at other parts of the country, and the existence of producer groups with interest in these types of products. So who's interested in it and how to pull them together to kind of have a cooperative commodity market around American origin products, at least as I understand that. So, and then Todd Schmidt at Cornell University is looking at the future of food manufacturing in New York State. So this is a bigger state level assessment that he's getting information on, and he's trying to analyze the economics of food and beverage manufacturing, the overall industry in New York State, to determine the importance of the industry to the state's economy, identify strengths and weaknesses of it, and then to use this information to inform the industry and help them strengthen the industry overall. Okay. All right. So just really quickly, some of you are probably more familiar with the environmental impacts. I see we're getting pretty close, and we want to give you a little bit of time at the end for further discussion. You may be familiar with Rich Pirog's work on food miles and environmental impact, and more recently it looks like that's been taken a little bit further, where folks are looking at what are the other parts of the production practice, including fertilizers and pesticides, and even hauling in food for animals, and how does that contribute to greenhouse gas emission. And so we're starting to look more holistically at the different pieces of production practices to see, and distribution practices to see the overall impact of food systems. And then land preservation and use, I think, is becoming more popular, and I know that there's quite a bit of work going on also with the American Planning Association, and planners are really getting into understanding this. So I just wanted to point to this one related to regional food system planning and the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. Their goals are to understand the region's food distribution system, the use of regional transportation system, the agricultural and land resources there, and how that relates to their goals for increasing local food supply, safety, and security. And as Walt just pointed out, a number of groups are really making these connections. And related to that, again, some work that was done at Cornell, and Christian Peters is now at Tufts University again. They looked at what the most efficient diet for New York State would be by recognizing that different soil types are better suited to different types of production, and if we look at those different types of suitability, are there certain diets that are certain land uses that would be more efficient than others to meet the needs of New York State consumers? And again, I could point folks to this information if there's any interest. So I'm going to move on quickly. Any questions about any of that? I'll just pause for a minute. Yes.
We do have a couple of questions. One from Melissa about whether CSAs, if there's any evidence that CSAs have increased vegetable consumption. And the other one was from Diane, wondering about if economists and the world is focusing on globalization, why is it that we're looking at, and there's this intense interest in redeveloping or developing local, regional, and food systems?
So I think related to the CSA, I think maybe I hope I answered that before. I don't know. I think that project isn't far enough along yet to have any results, but I would encourage you to follow it. Okay. Related to the other question, I think that's a really good question, and I worked with Tom Lyson at Cornell, and I think he's this person that's worked on civic agriculture, and I think that they would probably say that that the interest in globalization, or the recognition of the impact of globalization, impacts of globalization, are the very reasons that people are seeking this more local connection. It gives a sense of control, and this is just me thinking about this in terms of the research and reading that I've done over the years. It's people are interested in being able to make more local connections. There's more local control, where the sense in the global economy, it's difficult to compete as small entities in that, but how do we come together as communities to and individuals to kind of recreate the space that's maybe been usurped through globalization. I'm not sure that's particularly articulate, but I hope that starts to answer that question, and would invite anyone else to chip in. Diane, did that do that? I'd also be happy to talk with you about it after. Yeah, I would definitely say that this is bottom-up driven. It's really producers and consumers to coming together at a community level and saying, we want things that global system isn't currently meeting, and how do we get to them? Okay, we're down to just a couple of minutes, and I don't want to hold you on longer than we promised we would have you there. I'm afraid time is moving really quickly. So, is there other research? What else have we missed? I'm sure there's quite a bit that we've missed, and I'm not sure we're giving you a big opportunity to share that here, but if you we'll again send out a note with some of these resources, and in that you'll have my email address, and we'll invite you to share other research. So if there's other stuff going on, please share it with us, and we'll get that back out to everybody. Is one way I think we can handle that. And I just want to point to some opportunities to continue the conversation and develop collaborations relating to all of this work. Be a part of this webinar series. We still have some room. We've currently closed the registration site because so many people did register. We've got it pretty much filled, but I'm sure that there are some of those folks that won't go on, and as we get closer to the dates of the next couple webinars, we'll be asking for confirmation for the folks that signed up for it and have a waiting list. So, if you want to be a part of this, the next couple, but there'll certainly be more webinars in the future, and we won't be marketing them all with the registration at the same time. I think we want to be sure we're giving lots of different folks an opportunity to participate. So be a part of this. Think about joining the center's local and regional foods listserv so you can get updates when new resources are coming out. There's also a research and assessments work group at NESOG that you could join. We put the link in there, but that came out of their conference that they're really trying to pull people together to support folks with research. Oh, Cheryl, thanks very much for mentioning the Northeast Ag and Resource Economics Association's conference on local food markets. It's June 15th and 16th, so that's another opportunity. The other thing is, not only participating in the webinar series, but again, if you have a webinar or a project that you think would be of interest to other folks, or you would like to engage other people across the region or the country in a conversation about your work, we could facilitate that through this webinar series. So please let us know if you have an interest in being part of it. Furthermore, we have at the Northeast Regional Center been talking about creating an e-extension community of practice around local and regional food. So if you have an interest in doing that, we've put that on our evaluation. Just let us know, and if there is an interest, we will start exploring a way to do that. And so that would be a group of researchers and extension folks coming together to further the area of research in a kind of deliberate and strategic way, and pooling together our existing extension resources and research information so that we have it in one place and can more easily share that with extension educators and other researchers across the country for their work in communities. So, okay. Other opportunities to further this conversation. If anybody has any parting comments as they're getting off the line, we certainly welcome welcome that and hear that. Walt is sharing the center's website. And just before you go, we just want to give you our contact information and also ask you to please complete this evaluation. This is our first local food survey. We want to hear whether or not it was useful, how do we do with it, and your feedback is really important to us and will be used to shape future webinars and our work around this issue. So thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we'll stay on for a couple more minutes if